There's no more fitting place than here, that is the home of Iran's organised resistance movement, sharing the platform with Madam Mujahedin, whose name and organisation strike fear into the very heart of the mullahs. The Iranian regime uses the nation's diplomatic privileges, their resources, institutions and powers for repression, persecution and terror. However, it state-sanctioned killings, executions and assassinations cannot suppress the unbreakable will of the Iranian people, who are determined to reclaim their freedom.
So, today, I urge the British government and other European governments now, firstly, to recognise the Iranian people's democratic aspirations and support Mariam Rajavi's 10-point plan. Secondly, acknowledge and recognise the right of the Iranian people and their resistance units to defend themselves against repression and the terrorism of the IRGC. And thirdly, to engage with the NCRI as the legitimate democratic opposition in Iran and the only acceptable alternative to the current regime.
Therefore, I urge the UK and the EU and anyone else with influence to work together to bring the NCRI and Madam Rajavi's 10-point plan as a visible democratic alternative to what is happening in Iran today, to trigger the JCPOA snapback mechanism, to reinstate UN Security Council resolutions and suspended sanctions, to seek a verifiable end to executions, to torture, to terror sponsorship, as well as allowing UN mandate holders to visit Iran. But sanctions alone are not enough. The UK must now proscribe the IRGC as a terrorist organisation. This was a step which was backed by the UK government previously and backed by our current government.
The international community must stand on your side and must recognise the Iranian people's right to resist and self-defence against the IRGC and the right to replace a regime that has never represented hopes or dignity or sovereignty of the Iranian people.
I basically have 5 calls for action for our governments in the West. The first is relatively straightforward and should be done. The NRCI and yourself should be recognised as the voice of democratic change, for that is what you are. We need to designate the IRGC as a terrorist group. I called for it to be proscribed many times while I was in Parliament, and I'm glad to hear that so many parliamentarians across the globe continue that call. Its crimes are not, as I said, not just in Iran, but are global, and we should take that stand. We need, of course, to also see international tribunal to prosecute the regime's leaders for crimes against humanity. And not just prosecute, we should be imposing sanctions against the illegal gains that they've made. And we need to back the No to Execution campaign led by the brave political prisoners. Over the bulk of the world's executions take place each year in Iran. That is utterly unacceptable. And we should make it a condition on any engagement that ending executions, freeing political prisoners and halting support for terrorism needs to be at the fore. So it's more than Iran, it's about all of us in the world. And I hope that we can stand together with a clear voice.
I will be giving my full support in the Westminster Parliament to moves to support a free Iran. The 10-point plan which you have, which is something that I will continue to urge the UK Parliament to recognise. If we keep up the pressure, we will secure democracy and freedom in Iran. So let's move forward for a free Iran now.
I urge the UK government to work with the European allies to reform Iran's human rights dossier to the United Nations Security Council prosecution against the regime people. Furthermore, the UK and EU must support the creation of a special UN tribunal for Iran through the UN General Assembly, Third Committee, we call on the international community to join us in support of the democratic alternative and starting with you until Iran is free.
I'm telling that as a scientist. There is no solution. The end of this dilemma is very clear. The end of the regime in Iran soon. But there is a solution. There is a very powerful solution lying elsewhere. Where? Here. Here with you. With the NCRI and under the leadership of President Rajavi. The future of free Iran is under preparation right now, in front of our eyes, preparing by the NCRI with a 10-point plan proposed by Madam Rajavi.
In this context, we have also seen the emergence of fake oppositions, such as Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former monarch, whose brutal dictatorship was decisively rejected by the Iranian people. The slogans, "Down with the oppressor," be it the Shah or the Supreme Leader, sends a very clear message out there. The international community must stand with the Iranian people and their legitimate aspirations. The recent endorsement of Madam Rajavi's 10-point plan by a bipartisan majority of members of the U.S. House of Representatives shows that the true voice of the Iranian people is finally being heard, and that the missing piece in the Iran policy puzzle, the role of the Iranian people and the organized resistance, is beginning to take its rightful place.
And I suppose all we can do is encourage and support them in every way possible. But I'm certain, as Madam Rajavi said, the NCRI knows the regime best and offers practical recommendations to support the Iranian people's fight for freedom. It is time for the EU to listen, and it's very important that we act. And what we need is now is straight talk, action and results, and act on those, beginning with outlawing and blacklisting the IRGC. Iran stands at the threshold of change, and Europe must be on the right side of history with the Iranian people, the NCRI and Madam Rajavi.
President Rajavi's 10-point plan, it calls for a secular republic, free and fair elections, gender equality, and the abolition of the death penalty. Values that resonate within every free, normal, law-abiding society. Everything indicates that this year could mark a turning point. The Iranian people are ready. We, good-willed people, are ready. We see it in the bravery of the resistance units, in the nationwide protests, in all those Iranian spirits that simply refuse to be broken. History tells us that when people are ready, no regime, no dictatorship can stand in their way, and love for the country, for peace, will find a way. The ruling clerics are at their weakest. They fear their own people and the growing strength of the resistance. The EU's role is pivotal in aiming to adopt a firm new policy. The first step would be to recognize actually the NCRI as the democratic alternative. We, as the majority of MPs in Malta and dozens of other countries, have already been calling for this for some time now.
As a Canadian, I commend Canada's designation of the IRGC as a terrorist entity, a step long advocated by the Iranian resistance. The UN and EU, and I trust soon the UK, will follow suit. Appeasement only emboldens the regime's terrorism. The West and the world need a democratic Iran. It is essential that all of us stick together to see it come to fruition and become a reality. I trust that day is soon to be realized. And I thank all of you here today for your continuing efforts in this regard.
Now we need unified action. But real change doesn't come only through sanctions or statements. It begins with a vision, one that offers hope, direction and a plan. And that's what Madam Rajavi and the NCRI have brought forward. Their platform isn't just political, it's deeply human. It's about choice, equality, freedom of belief, and most importantly, respect for every single citizen. I believe we'll see a democratic Iran, and not in some too distant future, but in our lifetime. But until then, we, members of the Irish Parliament and Senate, will stand with you always.
Madam Rajavi, Ireland has long championed democracy, independence and the right of nations to determine their own future. We should now apply that principle to Iran. That means supporting the right of the Iranian people to resist oppression. That means recognising the NCRI as the legitimate democratic alternative. It also means demanding the EU and the UN take a real enforceable action, not just statements. The time for talking is over and long over. And this is why I wore my Ireland EU pin today, because the EU has a responsibility here.
We stand with the resistance units. Their right to resist tyranny and their courage in confronting the IRGC must be recognised. Madam Rajavi, you are a leader grounded in values we share in Europe: freedom, justice and equality. Your 10-point plan is a roadmap for dignity, free elections, gender equality, a secular republic, an Iran free of executions and nuclear weapons.
The regime increasingly focuses on those with ties to the resistance, especially the PMOI. Many now face execution simply for supporting the NCRI and your 10-point plan, Madam Rajavi. This is the regime's fear, not of weapons, but of ideas and vision. And yet the regime is failing. More Iranians, particularly the youth, are rejecting tyranny and embracing yours and the NCRI's democratic vision and solution. Madam Rajavi, your 10-point plan offers a real path to freedom, to unity, and to the peaceful transfer of power. Not to seize control, but to return it to the people of Iran.
I think the 10-point plan that many people have spoken about is eminently sensible, and, you know, to do away with tyranny, I mean, it seems like such a basic thing to want to do, but also the separation of religion and state and the formation of a republic. That's something that we have done in Ireland, and it's something that we support your endeavours to do, as well as obviously... Yeah. Yeah, so we are here to support you as ever, and that support hasn't waned over the years.
We absolutely reject the dictatorial behaviour. We stand for freedom, democracy and human rights. And we absolutely endorse the Iranian opposition's 10-point plan, an alternative plan for a free and democratic Iran. We want... The 10-point plan would see an end to the compulsory wearing of the hijab, an end to compulsory religious activities. It would end dictatorship, and most importantly, it would end the brutal executions.
The regime clings to power through killing and intimidation, exporting its violence across the Middle East and targeting dissidents in Europe, undermining our democracies. This is why we have a common cause with the Iranian people and the NCRI, and that is why we must act. The EU must designate the IRGC as a terrorist organisation. The regime's human rights dossier must go go to the UN Security Council for prosecution, and the world must recognise the NCRI not just as an opposition, but as a legitimate alternative committed to holding free elections and returning the power to the people of Iran.
Appeasement has clearly failed. Decades of negotiation have only emboldened this regime's violence and lies. It's a time for a firm policy that includes, as mentioned before, recognising the NCRI and its resistance units as a legitimate voice of Iran's future, designating the IRGC as a terrorist organisation, demanding accountability for crimes against humanity, and placing Iran under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter for its threat to peace. To those resistance fighters in Iran, your courage is heard by people here and far beyond, all over the world, far beyond your borders. And to the regime in Tehran, your end is written not by foreign intervention, but by your own people who you have tried to silence. Their voices grow louder, stronger and unstoppable.
I proudly join in backing and endorsing this democratic alternative, as advanced by the NCRI and embodied in Madam Rajavi's 10-point plan. At its core, this plan reflects the will and desire of the Iranian people to live in freedom and self-determination. Madam Rajavi, that is why you and the NCRI will succeed, and I have no doubt that your people will soon live in a free and democratic Republic of Iran. We stand with you until that day.
We cannot be indifferent to what is happening in Iran. We and all the international community have a civil and moral duty to stand with this resistance, led by Mrs. Rajavi, and also the Iranian people in general, but if you allow me a special word to the hunger strikers right now. And also, we stand with the demonstration and support for a democratic and flourishing Iran.
I know, and we all know, that Iran will not return to monarchy. And people in Iran don't want it. But we have to tell them that. I'm calling the European policymakers to recognize the NCRI and the 10-point plan as the only organized democratic alternative. We stand, and I stand with the people of Iran, and I always will, especially with the women who have paid the highest price for freedom. The IRGC is a terrorist organization, and we have to do everything we can to combat it.
La campagne Non aux exécutions et la bravoure des unités de résistance du MEC témoignent de leur détermination, même face à la répression la plus sévère. L'apaisement a échoué. Il a prolongé la souffrance et l'instabilité. La Suisse et l'Union européenne doivent défendre le droit à la résistance du peuple iranien, tel qu'affirmé dans la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme, et soutenir les aspirations démocratiques du Conseil national de la révolution iranienne. J'appelle les dirigeants européens et suisses à agir de manière décisive, inscrire le CGRI sur la liste noire, imposer des sanctions pétrolières et soutenir le peuple iranien dans sa quête d'un Iran libre et démocratique.
I strongly hope that sooner rather than later, Western governments follow your lead, the honourable representatives and legislators, and start listening to the NCRI and stop legitimising the regime. Do what is right, even by their own people and by history. Disarm the dictator, empower the people, and leave the rest to us, the Iranian people and our resistance.
A prosperous Iran, the Iran we are all fighting for, with all of your support, for which I'm very, very grateful, and so is everybody here today, will not come about by returning to old autocracies, but by empowering a new generation committed to democracy, justice and human rights for all. By recognising the legitimate aspirations of the Iranian people and supporting the Iranian people's opposition movement, the PMOI, which is committed to achieving a secular and democratic republic, free of oppression, nuclear weapons and terror.
The international community must decisively condemn and impose comprehensive sanctions against this regime. Blacklist the IRGC as its main pillar of repression, aggression, war and terrorism. It must recognise and support the right of the Iranian people and resistance units to overthrow this criminal regime and to establish a free and democratic republic in Iran by supporting Mrs. Rajavi's 10-point plan. Silence is complicity. There is no time for neutrality. There's only time for action.
We are here to demand an end to executions, especially the executions of Mehdi Hassani and Behrouz Ehsani. We demand the release of all political prisoners. The regime must be held accountable for its ongoing crimes against humanity. We call on the UK, US and the EU leaders to recognise the Iranian people's legitimate right to overthrow this dictatorship and to establish a democratic republic based on separation of religion and state. Also, we urge them to support the 10-point plan of Mrs. Maryam Rajavi, a platform for a free and democratic Iran.